Welcome back to the continuing conversation around art, placemaking, and how to create meaningful experiences. I'm your host, Martha Weidman, CEO and co-founder of 9.Arts. And before we jump into our episode today, quick reminder again, we've got this ebook that we recently released. It's called The Art of Placemaking. It's just chock full of amazing information about exploring the fundamental principles of creating one-of-a-kind destinations through the power of art and culture. For a free download, go to 9.arts.com/placemaking and check it out. I think you might, learn something you haven't read about before. Today, our guest on the show is Chris Frampton, the CEO of East West Partners. And I think the first time I ever met Chris, he was speaking on a real estate panel about some of his major developments in Denver, including Union Station. And I got to tell you, he was the most entertaining speaker on the panel, super laid back, had the best jokes. And I thought, I hope I get to work with this guy someday. So I feel very fortunate that we had the opportunity to work with East West Partners on their building at the Coloradan. That's a condo, retail, mixed use, amazing multifamily project in the Union Station neighborhood. And we helped them create this art and culture experience in the ground floor called Union Hall. Super fun group to work with, amazing, talented team of people. And I think you'll enjoy this episode because Chris talks about how their firm, East West Partners, is working coast to coast on real estate projects across multiple different verticals. He talks about developing destinations that are environmentally sound and mindful. They've got a pretty unique approach to real estate development. They're very intentional, very collaborative with local communities. They make these great inroads and partnerships. They've got great programs with art and cultural integration. It seems to be an inherent structural part of their work. And you'll hear Chris talk about making these terrific places. That means everything from aesthetic beauty to organic community building and challenging the sameness that we can find in cities and challenging that through things like art and culture and community. So I think you'll enjoy this episode. If you're in Denver, you'll recognize some of the work that Chris Frampton and East West Partners has done. You've seen their work at Union Station, Commons Park, the Coloradan and Union Hall, and more. So I think you'll enjoy this one. Check it out. Charleston, Denver, Snowmass, Deer Valley, and Kauai. And so I'm looking forward to having Chris introduce himself. And one question that I'm curious to know about is, do you choose the places where you work, Chris, just based on where you'd like to go on vacation? Because I love that list of places where you're working today.
Actually, we do. So a core value at East West is that we will not go into a market unless a senior partner is willing to move to that market full time, take his or her family there, and be there for the next 15 to 20 years. And that's just a rule. And East West started in Vail. And so no disrespect to Arlington, no one's been willing to move to Arlington for whatever reason. But folks have said, I want to move to Charleston. I want to move to Denver. I want to move to Steamboat. I want to move to Sun Valley. I want to move to Ogden. I want to move to Park City. I want to move to Kauai. So yeah, we actually do choose them intentionally.
Well, I think this is an excellent business strategy that we should perhaps all adopt to choose where we work by the places that we want to live. So I love what you're doing there. It's absolutely been successful. But before we jump in more on that, why don't we step back for a minute? Could you tell our listeners a little bit more about who you are, what you do, and why it matters?
Sure. That's a big question. So I am husband and my wife, Yvette, and we together are parents to our three very cool kids and one really good dog, and have been in Denver for about 20 years. I think for me personally, I love doing real estate development because I really have a love of walkable, accessible communities, whether they're in resort or urban settings, which is really fun. And I love the idea of building a thing and then turning it over to the world. But still being able to go back and see it and enjoy it. So for me, that's a really big part of what East West does. And it's very organizing for me in my professional life and even in my personal life. So that is my driver. And I think it's good because I work at a company that's driven by the same thing.
Well, what are you working on right now that you're really excited about?
I mean, outside of work, I think I'm probably having the most fun working on Civic Center Park here in Denver, which maybe some of the listeners know, is a long, struggling, and very difficult place to do work. It is in the middle between our city and county building. It is the place where the Broncos go when they win a Super Bowl, and it is the place where the Broncos go when they're protesting police violence and for equity and justice. It is the most visited place in Denver from an arts and culture standpoint in Civic Center. It is obviously the seat of our state and city government. And then at the same time has all kinds of challenges with transient visitors and folks who use it for selling and using illicit drugs. So it's a really amazingly difficult and fun project. I've been working on it for about 15 years, and it's a pretty cool place to work. That's
and
probably
also
from a social life, it's probably my favorite thing that I'm working on.
Well, as a founding member and the board president, of course, that's a huge impact for our community. And it's also a timeless location too, for, like you mentioned, so many different major moments of our city's history have had celebrations or, protests or, even when it's turned into living quarters unexpectedly over the past couple of years, or the off Wall Street, protest was happening there. So it's every major event that's political seems to have a sort of tie to the Civic Center Park. And they recently had an anniversary, if I recall, the Greek amphitheater there. Was it 100, 150 years, 100 years?
So we like to say it's 100 years old. We've been saying that for at least a decade. It's not really clear it's clear when it started, but how do you decide when is the 100-year anniversary? Strangely, is a difficult decision. Mayor Spear actually had been forced out of office, and then he was begged to come back, and he said he would only come back if he could build Civic Center Park in our parkway system and have our strong mayoral state of government, which is way afield here. But they created Civic Center kind of in the old bad way. They tore down a bunch of housing and created the park. And so that was that. Did it start when they started tearing the houses down? Did it start when they finished? Well, it's never been finished, so I can't tell you when they finished. We're not done yet. And so we go with 100 years. That feels pretty good. Spear was mayor in the 20s, so it seems close enough, right?
Yeah, I'd say, at that time span, it's within 10%. And I like the way you described it. It's like Sagrada Familia. It's the project that just goes on forever.
It's an interesting place to work, by the way. One of the things that we've had an enormous amount of success and an interest in is that it is immediately adjacent to the Denver Art Museum. And it really sits at the cultural seat for Denver, not from a performing arts standpoint, but from visual arts and historic arts and the public library. And so art actually has been a huge part of our programming. And then again, a huge part of actually our solutions to challenges. So there's actually there's a sculpture there, which people think is about Christopher Columbus. It actually turns out it's not, which is pretty interesting. But that piece has actually inspired lots of protests over the years, lots of discussion over the years. And in fact, now the Columbus Day parades start there as a result of all of that. So
just a miscommunication, and now the parade's starting there.
Yeah, I mean,
it's
there's
a typo.
Plaque, and it's just a coincidence that the plaque is there. The piece has nothing to do with it. And then during George Floyd protests, we were very worried about some of the historic pieces getting damaged as those protests would get more severe. And there was particularly a problem around downtown with tagging and with graffiti, all the super valid form of protest, but we were worried about these great old structures. We actually ended up striking up a partnership with the local African-American-led artists collective and went and working with them, figured out a way to wrap all of our historic statues. And then they put together a show created from scratch around all of that wrapping. It was actually a form of protest in and of itself. And so there was this great way to really give somebody a really awesome way to express themselves, not just through graffiti, but actually through a larger, really protest-worthy piece of art. And then at the same time, not to destroy the historic structures and the components of the National Historic Landmark, which the park is. So art's actually a huge part of how we think about the park, program the park, manage the park, et cetera.
So what was the name of the group that did that installation?
So they were brought together by an artist named Rob Gray, and they created the installation, which they called Black Love Murals. And it was really fun and absolutely fascinating.
Art can be such a powerful tool in so many different ways. And it's interesting and it's cool to see how you're using it, especially in times like the BLM movement, to address those concerns, especially around statuary in our public space, which has been such a hot topic for the past few years in particular.
Yeah.
But back to the work that you're doing at East West, you've got this incredible portfolio. You've got projects across multiple verticals that we were talking about earlier: hospitality, multifamily, mixed use, urban planning at a massive scale.
Yeah.
What is unique to your approach in these projects?
I think there's probably two ways to think about that. I would say that we inherently embrace the concept of mission, vision, values of a space, which we truly embrace early with our local partners, our financial partners, and our construction and design teams to really drive projects forward. And we don't forget them. So one of our values is no corner cutting. So if we say art's going to be a big part of this, we can't get 50% of the project, be over budget on something, and then go, well, cut Martha's budget in half. Can't do that. That doesn't work because it's violating the value. So I think that's a first things first component that really drives us forward to do this. I will also say that we're uniquely trained to do it. We have sales teams, we have property management teams, and we've done it a lot. And so the idea of a vertical master plan community is pretty rare. So what we got to do at Union Station or Riverfront Park or Snowmass Base Village or downtown Charleston at the Gadsden, those projects are very unique. It doesn't happen very often. They don't come along very often. And so we've built up a skill set that kind of gives us a chance to get to do those things when others don't get it.
East West Partners, on your website and in a lot of your materials, you talk about designing terrific places.
Yep.
What do you think makes a place terrific, and how do you design for terrificness?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So I think a terrific place is one that is active. It is one that organically creates community amongst its residents. It is a place that's beautiful. It can't be terrific if it's not gorgeous. It is of incredibly high quality, and it is a place that people really care about for the long haul. And so once we're gone, and we do leave, once we're gone, the folks who've moved in as an office tenant or as a resident or as a small business at the base of one of our buildings, those folks care about the place and take care of it. You can see that here in Denver at Riverfront Park, where we finished our work, our side, the development side, a decade ago. And yet that place, Commons Park, is unbelievable. They do an amazing job of taking care of the place. Their HOA is really strong. And at the same time, they're all super friends. They just built a new garden in the park. They went and lobbied the city to get that done. And so they're all out there growing vegetables. They're all hanging at the noodle shop. They're getting their teeth done at the dentist. And they all know Dr. Hall really, really well. And they all know each other. And it's that kind of, and that's in the middle of Denver's a big city. So that creation, when we leave, if the quality continues and the community emerges, then we've had a really big success. And it's interesting because in urban settings in particular, that's true in resort settings too, there are going to be lots of challenges that those neighbors are going to have to deal with over time. So here in Denver, coming out of COVID at Union Station, lots of challenges because all of the workers left. And then all of the things that were happening around homelessness as a result of COVID, lots of challenges. And the neighbors inside of the Union Station community came together to work with every single constituent and stakeholder to sort of work through and get to a place that's a nice solution to lots of the challenges. And that solution is not just arrest a small group of people. That solution is, how do we direct folks who are experiencing challenges to get the help that they need? How do we make sure that it's comfortable for a older woman to walk down the street at 8:30 at night? Figuring all of that out together has been a really interesting thing to watch. And then oh, by the way, at Union Station, throw in the fact that it's the central hub of our entire transit system in Denver. And you've got a lot of really interesting complexity. But if we've done our job right, the systems have been left behind and those projects are going. And that community exists. So that for us is terrific.
Well, to me, what's so cool about multiple of the neighborhoods and environments you've designed, from Riverfront Park to Union Station, these are destination locations. Not only are they the neighborhoods for the people who live there and the people who are coming through, but they're destinations for people that live in other parts of the city. I ride the train. I bring my kids downtown to Union Station to ride the train in and have ice cream and play in the fountain. So it is a destination in and of itself. And Riverfront Park had the concert series. We would come in and see a concert, which, it's a public benefit in a way for the entire community.
Urban spaces and resort spaces are for people, and they're for people before they're for anything else. So, you go to the outer suburbs of any city in America today, and there's roughly 100 trillion square feet of industrial space under development being built in those spaces. Those spaces just aren't for people, but urban settings and resort settings are for people first. And so designing with people in mind, with humans in mind, and being human centric first and foremost is one of the nice things we get to do because of the kind of work that we work on. And I think this is really important. Everybody likes skating rinks and everybody likes fountains. So if you go to an East-West project, we're 100% guaranteed we'll have fountains. And if it's cold enough, we'll have skate rinks because everybody likes them.
Well, you heard it here. The trick to people first places, skating rinks and fountains. It's so simple, but it's so true. Yeah. They're irresistible. Well, East West has clearly done well. You've won 3 awards for excellence for your projects by the Urban Land Institute. So a huge accomplishment. Everything you're doing is clearly working. And I want to dive in a little deeper on your vision statement, because I think that ties into what you were describing as being a people first planner. Yeah. Your vision statement's an indication of your commitment to a socially responsible business practice. You talk about being a creative and responsible company to make the world a better place economically, environmentally, and socially. We talked about fountains and ice skating rinks, which are huge components to social gathering. But what other specific ways do you think your projects are achieving those environmental and social goals? Do you have any metrics for success that you're looking at?
As it relates to environmental, actually, we're quite fortunate to work in an industry that is really figuring out the environmental challenges that the planet faces. A lot harder in existing buildings. But in the development world, technology has really come to us. We have tried as a company for the last 20 or so years to be at the leading edge, sometimes bleeding edge of environmentalism and building our projects in such a way that they are super environmental. Back in the day, that started with doing the first lead projects of any kind in the resort world. Fast forward to today, and we are developing our projects 100% net zero carbon operating, meaning that once they're going, they don't use any non-renewable resources. A huge focus for us and something we're actually pulling off all the way across the company. So the green stuff's fun. We get to do things like use earth tubes, which are these giant tubes that go down underground and air gets sucked into them. And almost like geothermal, you heat and cool the air underground passively and then bring it in. We built a building with an insulation type called phase change material, which is just insane. It's got a gelatinous liquid in it. And when that liquid gets hit by cold air, it warms up. And when it gets hit by warm air, it cools down.
Whoa.
So no electricity involved at all to do that.
Wow, it's crazy science.
It's crazy, right? And then, so those are fun things. No more gas fireplaces, unfortunately, which is disappointing to some people. Although I try to remind everybody, gas fireplaces are not real either. So I think, so that's the green planet stuff. On a social component, East West, as we've talked about a little bit, is very locally focused. And so our projects look very local to what is needed in that exact local space. And of course, every city has, and every resort area has lots of things they have to deal with. And some of those are common. There's a workforce housing problem in every resort that we work in. But we also look to our teammates who are leading those projects and what are the things that they care about and what are the things that they're interested in. And then when we develop our projects, we try to make our projects inherently support those civic issues. So, you and I both know this because we did it together at Union Hall at the Coloradan. So when 9DOT and East West worked on what's called Union Hall at our condominium project at Union Station, East West we knew that we wanted to create a new kind of space that the arts community, in essence, would be invited into to use. What we didn't know is actually how to do that. So what we tried to do is we said, look, this is important. We have lots of places that we can consume art. What we want to do is create a system that supports the local arts making community. And how do we do that? And so we did like we oftentimes do. We went out and found a really good consultant. I don't know if this is good for your podcast or not to, say that it was 9DOT, but it was 9DOT. And obviously that was step one. But as you also know, step two was figuring out how do we make sure this thing has the financial support to last long beyond us. And so a very important piece. And so created a program where actually anytime a home sells at the condominium project, which is 300 and some odd homes, anytime one sells, a percentage of that sales price actually goes back to a not-for-profit, which in turn supports the arts facility. And so it's those kinds of bits and pieces. We've done that lots of different ways. We did something very similar in Beaver Creek, where there's an arts program that is supported all across Beaver Creek. To do it, when we did Riverfront Park, it actually went to an arts and education program that supported downtown arts and education program. Most proudly spun out a thing called Platform, which was an artist in residence program to support children who were at very high risk through those art programs. That program ended up winning Michelle Obama's Arts Program of Excellence Award, which was really cool.
That's amazing.
Yeah, really cool. And the team there, did an amazing job. I think, we really don't know how to do those things, but we can identify the challenges and then hopefully find the right partners to get that stuff set up. And so we do that everywhere. There is not a project that doesn't have some component of that. We've just done a project in Deer Valley where Park City, like every other ski resort, has a workforce housing problem, and it's acute. And so there we did a very similar program with a transfer assessment, but that money goes specifically back to the housing authority. And so our project will be funding the housing authority for the next 20 years at some level, millions of dollars. And they actually can go borrow against that so they can create housing right away today on top of the affordable housing that we're actually building within the project. And so finding those important needs in those local areas, the things that need to be supported, not that writing a check to the local Dumb Friends League or the Denver Art Museum is not wicked important. It is wicked important. But to the extent we can make it structural within our projects, even better.
I remember that we came on to the work with Union Hall and had the problem of solving the fact we know we need an art and culture thingamajigger.
Yeah.
And how are we going to bring it to life? And it's really cool because the space is now this hub of innovation, inclusivity and impact, and provides a space for artists who are up and coming to have a museum quality show in a prime downtown location in the Union Station neighborhood that truly would not be accessible otherwise.
Yeah.
And I think what you're doing is really taking the time to find out what are the issues that community is facing specifically, and then how do we address that with a solution that takes the assets that are already there and brings them to the forefront for that community and that neighborhood.
Yeah. And hopefully it becomes super symbiotic. So, what was fascinating about that was the discovery that there was a whole group of beginning curators who needed a place to go and had an incredible challenge finding that place to go. It's been one of the more interesting learnings for me, I guess is the right word.
Yeah. And that was the concept for Rough Gems. So the very first inaugural show it's called Rough Gems because there were unpolished curators who needed an opportunity to show what they could do.
Yeah.
And of that Rough Gems exhibition, every single one in that very first show was knockout, was such a hit that we started doing even more of those. And now you see the arts and culture reporter Ray Rinaldi, who writes for the Post and the New York Times, coming in to pick up what's happening at Union Hall in the Rough Gems exhibition to see what's next in the arts in the city of Denver. So it's very cool.
Cool win.
What would your advice be to other developers who are trying to create a model that's supportive of arts and cultural endeavors in their communities?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really sure. I think first of all, it has to be, I think you got to be committed to it and really want to do it. I think that there also needs to be a self-awareness that the artists have value. That's a slight dig at real estate developers who put up RFPs and agree to pay for the paint for somebody to put a mural on the side of their building.
Thank you.
And
we're all snapping and clapping for you right now.
So I think taking it really seriously and really committing to it is important. It isn't that hard to structurally support it within a project. There's lots of different things that communities need. And when we develop, figuring out what those things are that we care about, we can be really, really effective. Cities are going to ask us to do things. They're going to ask us to pay for affordable housing. They're going to ask us to rebuild streets and curb cuts and sidewalks. They're going to ask us, if we're building at a larger scale, to build fire departments. They're going to have things that they need, and they are going to, in our industry, we call them extractions, which is really negative, but they're going to need those things.
Yeah.
But there are also things that the bureaucracy of city government is just not involved in and not engaged in. And so that's a place where developers can really say, hey, these are things I care about. And they can figure out how to structurally support those things, whatever they might be. Whatever they might be.
What trends are you seeing that might impact how you think about projects moving forward, or maybe trends that you don't see that you think should be there?
Yeah, on the trend front, and I have to say, at least in the modern real estate development era in North America, I feel like Denver is almost on the bleeding edge, front edge of this, and that's the integration of real estate with art. Yeah. And here for us, it's the incredible mural community that we have, which is amazing. And those murals are becoming almost architecture, and architecture is almost becoming those murals, and that's been awesome. I think that can expand and actually get even more interesting. I'm always a little bit leery of, we leave a pot of money and here goes a piece of art and here goes a piece of art. The art can go right here between line A and line B. It's more that the art and the architecture really blend together at scale. Yeah. And I think that to me is really fascinating. And that, by the way, is not just visual art, right? That is interactive digital pieces, that's music, that's theater. Those things just being absolutely integral to each other becomes really pretty cool. One of the most interesting real estate development stories of the last 30 years is the 30A area in the Panhandle of Florida. So
I know it well.
Yeah, Seaside, Watercolor, Rosemary, Alice Beach. And Seaside's actually a really interesting example. And everybody who's in our world knows Seaside. But one of the things I think people don't think about is the Seaside Conservatory, which is their theater group, who puts on these relatively rapidly prepared, these are not off-Broadway, hoping to get on Broadway shows. They do it with a relatively small budget, but their stage is absolutely dead center of the architecture.
Yep.
And so their space, their lawn, which oftentimes is filled with dogs chasing balls and children rolling down the hill.
Yeah,
is
pickup games of any sort.
Yeah, it's also the stage. And and that conservatory is supported by the residents there through some sort of structural piece. It's not just a voluntary support. And so really, really cool. Serenbe in Atlanta has a conservatory also, and it looks like a theater, and they hang signs like it's a theater. And then if you walk through the doors of the theater, it's just a piece of grass that's actually the seating area for the cafe next door. And instead they close down a block for 2 months every year, reset up the stage, do big Broadway type shows in this really funky, weird setting. So there are lots of cool ways to integrate this stuff, and I think that's just going to continue to get better and better.
That one's such a cool example too. In Serenbe, they used they took the asset, which was their land and this beautiful forest space, and their theater productions, some of them were in one location, and then they would do progressive productions. So when they did the production of the Chronicles of Narnia, they had multiple stage sets set up within the forest, and you would walk from
like if you're in a different scene, or
you'd walk from one to the other.
Walk in. Huh.
Yep. And then when they did the Titanic, they actually sank the boat in the pond out there. And, I think it really is about working with what you have, right? Finding what do you have that's unique and bring that to the forefront. And also what's important to the people who live there? What do they want to be a part of?
Yeah.
And I think those are 100%. Some great examples.
Well, the other thing art can do really quickly, Martha, there is a massive challenge in the United States, the whole world, of sameness.
Yeah.
And so if I go to, we all know it in a suburban setting, but it's even true in urban settings. When the community is given the ability to create its own thing, it's influenced by stuff outside, but it can actually become distinctly local and really sort of more authentic of a place in that way.
I completely agree. So well said. The challenge of sameness is one of the problems that we were trying to solve when we worked on the Colorado Convention Center project. Is what had happened is all of the convention centers around the United States were built about the same time. So many of them were constructed in the 90s. And the design was to create a blank canvas where an event space could come in and take over for a week and have a massive trade show. And then after a decade, everyone realized they were going to trade show from city to city to city, and no one had any idea where they were.
Yeah.
So it all looked the same.
Yeah.
And so then there was this huge push to make places like convention centers reflect their local environment. So
it's actually a really good example.
I always love to close with one question. If you could tell us about a piece of artwork or a personal art experience, a concert, a play, a piece of architecture, a museum visit that made an impression on you or was especially memorable.
So my wife's grandmother, who immigrated from Cuba when Castro took over to Miami, loved to go to Neiman Marcus at one of the high-end malls in Miami. And you would go downstairs and there was a piano, and there would be a guy playing piano amongst the shoes and women's clothes and jewelry. And there was a seating area, and she would go and sit with her friends, and they would listen to the guy play piano. It was Nordstrom. That. Sorry, it was Nordstrom. And still is Nordstrom. And over the top of the piano was a painting of an egret set on a black background, almost like it had been a photo taken of it at night in some sort of studio setting, but it was a painting. And so my wife loved the piece. Baba, her grandmother, passed away. And Yvette asked the folks at Nordstrom, do you know where this painting came from? And they're all like, nah, we got no idea. So a year and a half later, she gets a call completely out of the blue, and it's the general manager at the Nordstrom at its Miracle Mile in Miami. And he says, I finally found the artist. And so we learned that it is an artist who works in Memphis, is rep by a gallery in Memphis. Yvette reaches out and says, do you think that we could see some of his pieces? And instead, he reaches out and says, it's always been one of my favorite pieces. There were a few things I wanted to do differently. Would you like to do it as a commission? And that repainted, commissioned version of that egret now hangs over our piano in our house. Oh. And I love the whole story of it. And I feel like a terrible person for not being able to remember his name. He actually passed away about 5 years ago, which was really sad, but nonetheless, a really cool story.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, if you find it, we'll include a link to it in the show notes from today. Right, cool. What a cool story. And I love that that's this way to remember someone who was so special to your family too.
It's nice.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show today, Chris. It's always a pleasure to speak to you.
Yep.
And if our listeners want to learn more about you and what you're doing and what East West Partners is doing, what's the best way for them to find you?
I mean, we do all the same stuff. We've got ewpartners.com. We've got Insta. We've got LinkedIn. We've got Facebook. Although has anybody been on Facebook in the last year and a half?
Well,
Nice
thanks again for joining us. I love having you on the show because you've got such a connection to the arts. We didn't talk about it during the show itself, but your wife Yvette that you mentioned earlier has a band. Is it Honey Empire? Is that still
Good memory? Yeah,
the name?
And she's a filmmaker. Yeah, so I get to see all that stuff.
So it's nice that you get arts and culture as part of your everyday life. It's pretty special.
Nice. It is nice. Hey, thanks, dude. That was fun.
All right. Thank you. And thanks for challenging our ideas of sameness everywhere. Thanks for tuning in to ... For more information about our guest and what we chatted about, check out our show notes at 9.arts.com/podcast. Keep in mind that is 9.arts spelled out .com podcast. And to keep up with our latest episodes, be sure you subscribe to 9.arts on YouTube or subscribe to ... wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to check out our free ebook, The Art of Placemaking, where we break down the creative placemaking process, share 5 key tips for transforming spaces into memorable destinations through the power of art and culture. And you can find that at 9.arts.com/placemaking. If you are looking to transform your project with art, go ahead and email us. Let's talk at 9.arts.com. Stay groovy. Until next time.